All right, here's another example of a Republican governor and legislature having discriminatory voting rights laws declared unconstitutional.
All right, folks, let's go to Ohio, where a federal judge's decision strikes down 2 voting laws, one of which he says discriminates against black folks. One of the laws requires voters to provide identifying information when casting absentee or provisional ballots. Those ballots were only cast after a voter's eligibility is verified later on. Advocates for the homeless and the Democratic Party argued the laws were unreasonable and created big hurdles for minority voters. Federal Judge Algernon Marbley wrote in his decision, quote, "The Ohio General Assembly took action after the disastrous 2004 election to expand voters' access to absentee and provisional balloting, and with the rollback of these improvements will disproportionately harm African-American voters." Joining via Skype from Cleveland, Ohio, is Subodh Chandra, a civil rights attorney. So first and foremost, we know for a fact that first in Ohio, Republican legislature signed into law by Republican Governor John Kasich was a voter suppression law. Residents there got enough votes to put it on the ballot in 2012. They took action to repeal the law because they knew it was going to go down in flames at the polls. What's going on with Ohio, critical state, where there's a continual effort to suppress the vote specifically of minorities?
Well, and good morning, Roland. Thank you for having me on. Let's be clear about why this is happening. Remember that no Republican has won the presidency without carrying Ohio since Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860. And only 2 Democrats in the last century, President Roosevelt and President Kennedy, won the presidency while losing Ohio. So Ohio is high stakes. Ohio decides who becomes president. And so as a result, what we've seen from the Republican General Assembly and the Republican governor in Ohio over the course of many years is various efforts to tinker with the machinery of elections, to disenfranchise voters, to just shave off a certain percentage of the electorate that might lead to victory for Republicans at the presidential level. It's a travesty, and fortunately we have federal courts who've been standing up to them and saying, absolutely not, we're not going to let you do that.
Now also, we saw after the Supreme Court, in essence, gutted the Voting Rights Act, many of these states moved quickly to implement a lot of these laws. But we also know in Ohio, back in 2012, they actually had different voting hours in Republican counties versus Democratic-leaning counties, where Republican counties got to vote longer than Democratic counties. Even the Secretary of State, Republican, had to come out and admit that after a federal court smacked their hands.
Well, and let me tell you exactly what happened, because I was involved in some of this, not the legal work in that 2012 matter, but in what led up to it. We all remember in 2008 with then Senator Obama on the ballot as the first African-American nominee for the presidency, that what we had was an unprecedented situation in which minority voters throughout the country were energized and excited. And so in places like Ohio, I organized a project to turn out thousands of African-American voters on Sundays through the Souls to the Polls program. We called it Vote Early, Vote Big. And folks would go to church on Sundays, and then they would come to the Board of Election in a collective group, and we would pray together, and we would talk about the history of voting rights, and then we would march together to the Boards of Elections and vote. Well, the Republicans didn't like that. They saw the long lines outside of the Board of Elections on Sunday, and so they tried to shut it down. They tried to curtail the hours on Sundays and pull everything back. Federal court said, no, absolutely not. You can't do that, because we know what you're doing. You're targeting African-American voters, and this is having a disproportionate impact on African-Americans who have a cultural affinity for this kind of collective Sunday voting. So we know why you're doing it. Now, you fast forward to this year, and what you see is efforts to try to shave off that percentage of the vote that might have issues with literacy, poorer voters, minority voters that might have issues filling out forms 100% correctly. But the key part to know is this, Roland. The forms that they imposed are totally unnecessary, even by their own admission. They've already identified those voters. They've already determined that they are qualified to vote, but they're disenfranchising them anyway.
All right, then, we truly appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Quickly go to our panel here. What do you make of, again, continuing efforts by Republicans to try, as he said, shave off percentages in order to win?
I think what we constantly see is this very BS situation of individuals who are trying to prevent American citizens or individuals from actually exercising their right to vote, and for the wrong reasons. They say that it's to prevent voter fraud, and we know that is very unlikely to happen, as most things that we've seen by numbers. So I think we need to provide every opportunity possible for people to be able to go to the polls, cast their vote for whoever they want, and not limit those hours or their places and spaces where they can do so.
So, Parrish, you said that Trump is going to help African Americans. Is he standing against these efforts by Republicans in Ohio?
I have not. I don't know that. What his stance is.
Actually, he's not said anything about this. So what about this?
That doesn't mean that he doesn't think that it's wrong. Just that he hasn't said anything on it. So we can't assume that he's somehow supporting it.
He talks about everything else.
Well, we can't.
So are these efforts by the GOP wrong?
Are these efforts in
To
Ohio?
suppress the vote by the GOP in Ohio, are they wrong?
I think that as it relates to voting, and I've always said this, I don't have a problem with having requirements to vote. There's requirements to to drive a car, to do a lot of things, to get into a club. There's requirements to get in.
But that's not right.
But what I'm saying is, if you're going to have these requirements, they need to be free, they need to be fair, they need to be applicable to everybody.
So is what Republicans in Ohio are doing right now, is that wrong?
I think if it's not free and applied to everybody and accessible to make it accessible to everybody to make it easier to vote, I think that those efforts are ill-advised.
Yeah, Roland, I would presume. Okay,
It's kind of tough when you see that something is wrong and you just can't say it because you're a Republican and Republicans are doing this crap.
ill-advised, wrong, or right?
I will say this, Roland. The Speaker of the House in Ohio is a dear friend of mine who happens to be a minority. I know his heart. I know how he is. And so, and here we go. I know his heart. There's a problem. I do. He's a friend of
Well,
mine.
his actions are reflective of his heart right now.
So what I'm saying is, I don't know enough about the particulars of that issue to say whether or not it's wrong. Or to denounce it.
Scott, 30 seconds.
Yeah, real quick. The information sought by this new legislation, and I'm glad this judge struck it down. The voter election processes and the government and commissions, they have this information already. When you go to register to vote, actually, they have a lot of this stuff. So this is just pile on, if you will. And by the way, the judge in that case was black, and I presume Donald Trump probably doesn't think or agree with that decision because he can't be fair and impartial.
Fam, real simple. Don't fall for the okie doke. Republicans want to continue with voter suppression, and I'm saying make it accessible to all. But don't try to put barriers, or we're gonna call you out, even if it's ill-advised.